Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons. Donell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education. And Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
You're listening to Literacy Talks, and today is an episode that's going to be a little different. It's personal, it's important, and it's a story that's been a long time in the making. The heart of another is a dark forest, always, no matter how close it has been to one's own. Willa Cather. This is an author that I really love. I've always loved that quote. It reminds me that understanding another person, even your own child, is never simple. And today's episode is deeply personal. It's about my youngest son, Bridger. And you've probably heard me talk about him before on the podcast. And I never thought I'd get to talk to him. I'm just going to say that again. He's 23 now. He's a writer, a storyteller, and one of the most creative, thoughtful people I know. But his path hasn't been easy. From a very young age, Bridger struggled to read and write, eventually diagnosed with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. School was often a painful mismatch for how his brain worked. And yet, from the moment he could speak, he was telling stories. And in fact, when Bridger was 2, he would begin almost every conversation with this phrase: "I'm going to tell you something that you don't know that is mostly true." I kid you not, that was the phrase. And no matter what followed, people listened. He had that kind of presence, big brown eyes, a contagious smile, and an ability to spin a story so detailed and alive, it could go on for an hour. I guess I'm hoping for the same kind of magic here today, even though I'm not 2 and I don't have the eyes or the charm. But I do have something to say. And more importantly, today you'll hear him say it. This episode is a conversation. It's a mother and a son talking about what it was like to grow up in a system that didn't always understand how he learned and how he learned to understand himself anyway. Along the way, we'll talk about the teachers he missed it, the stories that saved him, and an author who becomes a mentor through the pages, Brian McDonald, who helped him see his difference as a gift, not a flaw. Before we begin, I want to read a short passage from something I wrote years ago in the preface to a book I never quite finished. So that might be a topic of conversation for Bridger and myself today, is why I didn't finish that. A book that started as a way to make sense of this really challenging journey. Here it goes. First line. "Actually, I think being the mother of a child with dyslexia makes you think about a lot of things, like why learning to read is so critical to academic success and why not learning to read is so prevalent, yet still shrouded in secrecy and a certain sense of personal failure. And still, after all these years of talking, reading, studying, and learning about dyslexia, I'm not convinced I'm any closer to truly understanding the beautiful complexity of how my son learns, or the many ways in which his difference can enrich my life and the lives of those around him." So today, I hope you'll listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart, because Bridger's story isn't just his. It belongs to every child who thinks in ways who don't yet know, or we don't yet know, how to teach, and to every parent or teacher trying to walk through that dark forest together. This is something you don't know that is mostly true. So let's begin with that introduction, Bridger, my special guest, right? So Bridger, do you remember the kinds of stories you used to tell when you were little, before you could write them down, before reading was even on your radar? You had this ability to hold a room with your imagination. Where did that come from, and do you remember it? What do you remember of that?
My memory of my earlier years are a bit spotty, but I remember being read to a lot, and the feelings that I would have as when I was being read to were very potent. It almost felt compelled to chase those same feelings outside of a book. And because reading was a fairly, inaccessible thing for me, telling those stories was a way to achieve that same feeling.
That's so interesting. You talking about, because you really lived it, right? You lived those stories. You were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Bridger, for me, sometimes I wondered if the fact that you didn't have the page, you weren't reading the words on the page, but you were listening and hearing, it almost removed a barrier in a way to where you could access a story in a way that somebody else who's maybe looking at the page and going over the words, there's a distance between them and the story. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Telling a story is a lot different than hearing it, the experience of it. And so, putting myself in that seat of now telling the story, having listened to a ton of them before, it was very different, and it came with a different kind of reward. It's rewarding to hear a story. It's rewarding in a completely different way to have an audience respond to what you're telling them. And that, in a lot of ways, is more rewarding. At least at a very young age, I found that far more interesting. I still enjoyed listening to stories, but telling them was more enriching in a lot of other ways.
That's so interesting, because you would take people on a journey. Was that the rewarding part? Because you really did.
Mm-hmm. It was in the reaction. It was the shock and awe, and I think you saw that in other aspects of my behavior, where I would say things just to get a rise out of people. And, that would weave into the story as well. What is the most shocking, unbelievable, mostly true thing I could tell you, without losing you along the way, but also shock you and surprise you. And again, as I said, listening to those stories, that gives you, it gave me a lot. It was an incredible experience, and I wanted to give that to others as well. And so it was like a give and take. I felt like it was going both ways when I tried to tell a story. That audience was always a super important piece.
That's so interesting, because now when I think back on it, that is so true, how engaging the whole thing was. And so young, at a very young age, to be able to do that. What were your favorite kinds of stories to tell? Did you have a favorite kind of story, or did your mind just go wherever it went?
I told a wide variety of stories, but what I was always drawn to was, and I was never very good at telling them, but stories about the supernatural. I really, really I really loved, but I just couldn't find a way to tell them very well. So instead of having some supernatural element, it would be real life things that were pushed to an extreme that you almost couldn't believe them without tipping fully into the supernatural. That was just kind of my way of trying to tell those stories, but just simply not knowing how to pull that off.
And was it vocabulary that you lacked at the time, or more?
I feel like it was, for lack of a better term, respect. Because no one's going to respect this story. A 2-year-old telling you a story. Like, how many people are going to look at that and say, "Oh, this is a folklore.
Right.
This is not supposed to be taken literally." People are just going to say it's a 2-year-old and he's lying. So it would have to be rooted in reality for people to take me seriously. Because when you take a story seriously, that's when those emotions happen. That's when you're the most invested. Regardless if it is fantasy or, it has supernatural elements, you have to take it seriously. But coming from a 2-year-old, people don't take it seriously. So it had to be rooted in reality. It had to be just believable enough.
That's so interesting, because I was going to ask you if it felt like play or something more serious, but there was a lot of thought here.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily, those words didn't form in my head. These whole conversations about really what was I doing, really what was I trying to say. This was all passively understood that I'm not going to be taken seriously. So I have to, there's rules that I have to play by because of, who I am and how people will perceive me.
Okay, that's so interesting to me. So let's move into the school years because this was all preschool. And so, of course, I'm thinking this little guy loves story, tells a great story. Maybe we've dodged the dyslexia bullet because we knew it was within the family history. Your dad had it, right? So we're thinking, oh, geez, well, maybe we got lucky. And then we hit the school. And so let's talk about that. When did you first notice that learning, especially reading and writing, felt harder than it did for other kids? When did you realize that?
The alphabet, I think, was the first when we started learning the alphabet. And I realized that other kids could listen, they could hear the words A, B, C, and then they'd be able to say the words A, B, C. And for some reason, I'd get stuck on B or I'd get stuck on C. And it took, I mean, in talking to, Dad, just, and what it was like doing the alphabet, he told me, he said it took about like 6 months for me to learn it, like 6 months to learn A to Z, to be able to do that on my own. And that wasn't normal. I saw those students in class. I saw what they could do, and I couldn't do that. So it became very, very clear, very, very early on, that there was something wrong. I'm not like the other students. Yeah.
We're talking really young. So that's kinder first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kinder first grade. Were there moments that really stuck with you? Times that stood out where you felt really misunderstood, labeled even?
I remember, one time, this would have been about 4th grade, and I said I had dyslexia. That's when we knew what it was, and I had received remediation for it. And one of the other students said, "Oh, really? Read this passage." And then she pointed to, the sheet in front of us, whatever we were working on at the time. And I was able to read through it, and other kids were like, "You don't have dyslexia. No, you wouldn't be able to read it." And I felt like they just didn't get it. And dyslexia was always clear to me. That was never something I brought up with other people. But when I heard that, I was like, people really don't know what it is. People have no idea what I've gone through. And to try and explain that to them when they just saw me read a passage completely undoes anything I could do, anything I could say to them to give them an accurate picture of what dyslexia is. That was a very early experience. It was very eye-opening to how people really view it and how little they understand about dyslexia, just the average person. That was one. And there are, more than a handful of experiences in a classroom where I was asked to read something by the teacher and I frankly couldn't. And sorry, this might continue on longer than I planned, but there was a program we had in elementary school where we would read to the younger grades. And so I remember going into the classroom, like this would have been about 3rd grade, and I'm reading to the real young students. And, we'd all get into a room and we'd all, pick up a book, find a buddy and read to them. And I would mumble through the noise of this room. We were all reading in the same room, and it was just a droning hum of other kids reading. And I would just mumble along and get lost in it. And eventually my partner would stop paying attention because I couldn't read to them. That feels really terrible when you're expected to do something for someone else. You're expected to help. You're expected to teach. And I can't do that. I can't offer what I'm supposed to do. And that's really defeating. That one stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah. So at this point, your teachers know you have dyslexia. At this point, you've got an IEP, it's stated, but clearly they didn't know. Was there ever a teacher that knew? What was that like with teachers? What was that experience like? Did a lot of them not know?
A lot of them didn't. Yeah. Unless I said dyslexia, they wouldn't, they'd never say it. And even after I would say dyslexia or dyslexia was brought up, or they looked at my 504 later on, it was always a battle to get accommodations. That was never, I think maybe one time in all throughout high school or middle school and elementary school, one time in all that span, did one teacher actually take me aside for accommodations on a test for extra time. only one time where they took the initiative to actually do it. Yeah. So no, teachers did not know or care or knew what they were looking at.
Yeah. Did you have one, even one, just the one that took you aside for the accommodations? Did you have anyone that really understood or made it plain that they understood?
I don't remember what it was like in second grade, but I heard you talk about my second grade teacher as someone who, the one who caught it. But I don't remember what it was like with her. That's a little bit too far back. But beyond that, I really can't tell you. It's really felt like no one really understood past that point.
That's so interesting when we think about the school experience with dyslexia. So something I wrote years ago, Bridger, was about, as your mom, how I felt misunderstood. So I'm going to read that little bit here, and then I won't read anymore, I promise. But it's just this little section. I'm tired of being misunderstood as the mother of a child with dyslexia or a learning disability or slow processing, because apparently it's all the same thing, and it's used simultaneously to explain why my boy struggles to read. Do you think parents and kids both feel that sense of being misread? I think we both do, listening to you talk. What do you think?
It's hard to approach it because, again, I'm not, a parent and I don't have a child with dyslexia, but, if your child's getting this misunderstood when they're the one who has it, I can't imagine what that's like from a parent's perspective and how that relationship must be like, because it's shared. That misunderstanding is shared. When your child suffers, you suffer, right? And if that suffering is being misunderstood, you as a parent are being misunderstood. It goes both ways.
That's so interesting. It's got me thinking about our experiences and how we kind of both were having. As a parent, I on my end am trying to work with an educator that doesn't understand, and you on your end are the student in the classroom where the educator doesn't understand. And in different ways, we're both engaging with a system that doesn't get how to work with us, right? On your end and on my end. That's so interesting to think about. And how much of that impacts and stays with people in families, right, that might have more than one child with dyslexia. Your dad's experience with school certainly impacted the way he felt about coming to your school, didn't it? Yeah, how comfortable, uncomfortable he was to be in the school. That's really interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump into something that for me is a really positive subject, and it's a fun one for me. It's how so we talked about the fact that when you were young, you were very into story, and it was oral storytelling. And then as you got older, it was interesting because you found ways to engage with story. You would put together these books that, and I don't know if you remember this, Bridget, you were pretty young, but you would staple together large reams of paper, like stacks. That's all you wanted was a big old stack of paper for a printer. And then you would mess around with paper and make these books of your own. And you would write story, but you would be writing phonetically, obviously best to your account to write, so that I would then have to try to read it back to you. Do you remember any of those?
Yeah, I remember a few times. Yeah.
Okay. What was my favorite was that when I was reading it, because obviously some of it was phonetic spelling. So I was trying to guess at and you would go, nope, that's not it. Because I would read it incorrectly. That was the best. So you engaged with story all through the way. And then thankfully we didn't kill story in you, because I worried about that, Bridge, with all those experiences in school that would kill the story right out of you, right? Your desire to even tell or be around a story. And thankfully you held on to that, which I am so grateful for. And a few years ago, you found a mentor in the work of someone named Brian McDonald. And he's a screenwriter and a story expert, really, who's also dyslexic. And I don't know that you told me that when you first started reading him. And then maybe you told me later. But tell us how you discovered his work.
I wanted to improve in writing, and I started a little writing club with me and a buddy. And this is in high school. So a few years ago. And he had mentioned on the offhand this podcast, the You Are a Storyteller podcast. And I thought, sure, I'll check it out. And, he was singing high praises for it. So I was like, okay, sure, I'll check it out. And, the first episode I clicked on, I was like, this he's making a lot of sense. It was Brian talking to his co-host, and I'm like, everything he's saying is making a lot of sense, and it's speaking to ideas that I already felt were true. I just couldn't give voice to them. I didn't know what it was called. And then suddenly this person shows up and is saying exactly what I've been feeling this entire time, the things that I've already felt about story. And he's able to say it way better than I could ever, in a clarity that I could never. And yeah, from then it was just, everything just kind of clicked after that, for story. A lot fell into place. I was really thankful to have it. And so for that podcast, they've had tons of episodes, and I've gone through, each of those episodes. I watched, them at least 5 times each. So, I love it. I go back to it. I reference it all the time. So it was a really great resource.
Okay, so tell me this, because you are right. It really spoke to you. What was it about the way he described story that resonated, that made sense?
That it wasn't random. It's not just about making people feel something. It's about why you're making someone feel something. That's what story's for. And story as a teaching tool. We're not just making people feel things for entertainment. People find a lot of things entertaining. And I wish that was one of the things I learned earlier on. You mentioned at the beginning of this show that I would tell stories, and it was about the shock and awe, and it was about entertaining, and it was about making people feel something. But it wasn't just for entertainment. I was making people feel something because I wanted to feel something as well. I was trying to share something that I felt was super important. The things that I felt when listening to story, that was really important to me because I didn't get that anywhere else. And so to give that to someone else it was super important. It was super powerful. And so I was doing something important, and I knew story was important. And when I heard Brian talk about stories, and that it's not just for entertainment, it serves a greater purpose. It helps people solve problems in their life. It's about survival. And all survival is about life and death. There's emotions that have to be played, that have to be factored in. So when Brian's talking about that, when I first heard him, the understanding the importance of story and what it's truly for, that resonated with me, tenfold. So
beyond him being able to explain things in a way that really made sense, maybe for the first time, just the way that he approached talking about story, what did it mean for you to find out he had dyslexia, that he was dyslexic?
When I first heard it, I was a little surprised. And then looking back on it, it was like, well, of course. The approach that, it can't all just be random. There's a lot of discrete facts that I usually try and avoid this approach of memorizing a bunch of discrete facts. Story is this, story is that. And these things don't tend to comport with each other. That really doesn't make sense. And this may just be a dyslexic way of thinking, but everything kind of has to have a reason, and everything has to branch off of that reason. Like for learning grammar rules, if I don't really know why a grammar rule is in a specific way, I'm going to have a really hard time understanding that rule. If there's not something to compare it to, if it doesn't follow some kind of rule set that makes sense to me. So having story follow a very specific rule set. There are 3 acts, and each of these acts does a very specific thing for a very specific purpose, and that there's an underlying structure that permeates all effective story. Having this thing that answers all of your questions made a lot of sense to me. Instead of just disjointed parts, one connects here and there, and I was never going to hold on to that. Yeah, I don't know. That's just the way I think, and I think that's a fairly common approach with dyslexia, having this, ultimate rule that everything branches off from.
That's interesting. Okay, so you've got me thinking about a couple of things here that I kind of want to explore a little bit. That person who said to you when you were able to read the passage and they said, oh, you don't have dyslexia, does your mind ever go to, boy, if they could see me now, they never would believe I have dyslexia? Does that ever do you?
Yeah. It's a blessing to have remediation, but to be, as well off as I am now. And that's a great thing. I'd never trade it for anything. It's great, my abilities now. But they come with a cost. And that cost is you lose you lose part of being that community now. Because when I'm talking with my friends and they have dyslexia, it's like, well, geez, I'm relying on, 10-year-old memories in order to try and relate to you about this thing that I experienced, back in elementary school. That's really hard. I don't have a lot of current, present experiences that I can help resonate you with. So I'm having to rely on, memories in order to, share some common understanding with people, with other dyslexics. And so a lot of times it feels like stolen valor, when people say, oh, but you're dyslexic. Oh, and it's like, well, yeah, but not really. It's hard. You get to be your own person, but you don't really fit in both worlds. You don't fit in the dyslexic world, and you don't really belong in the non-dyslexic world. You don't really have a place, I guess. I don't get me wrong. It's great being able to read as well as I do. It's a wonderful thing. And again, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but it's not all sunshine and roses. You don't get to feel part of something anymore. Even if that thing that you were part of was a struggle, that's something.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I hadn't really thought about that. Because your dad is so proud, obviously, of all that you've been able to achieve. And he has said many times, I never thought that I would have a son with dyslexia who reads like this, who writes like this, who wants to write. He finds it incredible, but he also doesn't understand it. And there's a distance between the two of you, isn't there? It's almost like two different dyslexias, isn't it?
Yeah. It doesn't feel like we're having the same experience, and we're not. So it's very hard to have that, again, common understanding, the shared empathy for each other. Because he can't empathize what it's like to read at my level. And it's very hard for me to rely on such old memories to empathize with his experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't heard you articulate it quite like that before. Huh. That's it. You're straddling two worlds, aren't you, in many ways?
Yeah.
So obviously your relationship with writing is unique. You love a story. You actually live in story. But the act of writing itself hasn't always been easy. And I'm not even implying that it's easy today.
Yeah. When has it been easy?
Right? And as any writer knows, it's never easy.
Yeah.
But how do you write now? What's your process like? And is it evolving?
It is evolving. Yeah. Earlier, in my early years, it would be writing down everything phonetically, and kind of brute forcing it, really. And so I had to take there were a lot of creative liberties that I otherwise would have taken at a young age that I didn't, because I didn't know how to spell that word. I didn't know how to begin to spell that word or to formulate that on a page. So I would just reject it, I choose something else that I could find that I could kind of maybe spell, that someone could maybe guess at. But now I don't have those same restrictions. And well, it opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I still find myself trying to perfect it. So I feel like the writing phase for me, most of the writing I do is just notes and refining those notes. It's usually just asking questions. I'll just write down a conversation that I'm having with myself. It's like, why does he do this? Well, because of this. Why does he do that? Because of that. And it'll just eventually lead down a chain. And, 100,000 words later, I've got something that maybe kind of looks like something. But it's a lot of writing and perfecting. Those conversations, that was always part of my writing process. I just couldn't write them down. I was always having those conversations in my head. But now I have the liberty of going back through those conversations. It's like, well, why did I choose that? And I can just go back and find it exactly in my note. Oh, it's right here because I answered the question like this. That was a liberty I didn't have before. So, learning how to read and write gave me a lot of opportunity. And it also gave me the luxury of wasting a lot of time with notes when I would otherwise just refine this whole entire process in my head, and I wouldn't have to go back and look at the notes or why I did a certain thing. When you don't have the option of writing, it frees you up for a lot of stuff. There's definitely a lot of benefit that comes with that. You don't get paralyzed by your notes as often. you get paralyzed in a different sense. Like you have this one reoccurring question that gets kicked around in your head and you don't save all the drafts from it. And so when it gets to the page, people are like, wow, this is your second draft. This is your first draft. Really? This looks like a finished product. But all of this just happens in the open now. And I think the drawback of that is I get more paralyzed because it feels more finished on a page. My notes have to be perfect now because I'm writing it down. It has to be finished, right? That was always a thing that was ingrained in me from a very young age. If you're at the point where you're writing, it has to be finished. And so I take something that's obviously not finished and I put it on a page and it's like, well, it has to be done now. So I look at my notes as if they have to be the finished thing. And that's probably the most paralyzing thing about writing all of this down. I should probably cut that out of my workflow, at least some of that, because it's not doing me any favors. But that's the point I'm at it now.
And we've talked about how it's been an evolution. I think you've hit on something really important, though, and that is typically when we're teaching writing, and all through the years, we've discussed writing in one way or another because it's a part of my life. It was part of a career that I had prior. So writing has been something we've talked about a lot as a family, I think more so than maybe other families and maybe less than other families who maybe have many people that are writers in the household. At any rate, we're somewhere in there. And so you've had more discussion about writing, I think, than a lot of people. But it's interesting that when we teach writing, you're absolutely right. The drafting idea, even if drafting was difficult for other reasons because of dyslexia or whatever else, the actual formation of letters was challenging. We don't really teach that very well, do we, when we do the writing process? The drafting is part of writing.
Yeah, the saying that writing is rewriting, that's partially true. Again, it's the idea that like writing, like typing or forming letters is not writing. It's the idea that you're trying to achieve. That's the writing part. And that's always gets mixed up all the time. People can write endlessly about absolutely nothing at all. That's not the writing process. When I talk about writing or putting words down on a page, I'm purely talking about the refinement of ideas. It's not your word count that gets you there in the end. It's how refined is your idea by the end of it. And whether that takes, as many words as it takes, however long or short that may be, that's the true writing process that happens with that refinement. But it's not words.
It's interesting. Okay, do you dare share with us, what are you working on right now creatively?
I'm working on a story about your dad, actually. Yeah.
See, this is news to me. You heard it here first.
Yeah, I don't share what I'm working on because
No, you don't.
Most of them never get finished. So I'd rather not talk about it. But yeah, I'm working on a story about you're at least inspired by your dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a fun one. Got supernatural elements, the thing that I always like. I think I can finally pull it off now.
Okay.
Hopefully I learned something since I was 2.
You have definitely learned something. What's interesting, I want to point this out too, is you're not afraid. This is what I really like. You're not afraid to say, hey, I wrote a bunch of stuff. It didn't really go anywhere, but you've learned something every time you do that. And I think you're okay with that. You seem to be okay with that.
Yeah. It took a long time, but the growth aspect of writing, I now value more than the finished product itself. Which is a little backwards because the finished product, it does have great value. But if you only approach it from, I'm only getting something from the finished product, then you're never going to start because you'll inevitably fail a lot more times than you'll succeed. And when those are your odds, the act of getting a finished product and only gaining something from the finished product doesn't make any sense. That's a risk you'd never take. So in order to be okay with those risks, to get back on the horse every time you fail, every time an idea falls through or it doesn't happen, you have to feel like you're getting something out of it. And so that process is always more important. And that's why I don't often share what I'm working on, is because more oftentimes than not, that product always, it falls through and I don't have something finished to show for it. But I always feel like I have to be getting something out of it. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. But it took a long time to find that, to actually truly believe. That was always something I heard and I knew and it made sense and I'd say it, but I didn't truly believe it until, 5 years ago ish, when I was like, I was ready to give up writing completely and just, yeah, it's not for me. It's not going to happen. But I had to, I felt almost compelled to keep writing. Like you brought up earlier, I'm glad story wasn't beaten out of you. I don't think story can be beaten out of me. I don't think any amount of abuse could happen because that's my default mode. That's the thing I'll always return to. That's not something I'm trying to fight against, to push for, to strive for. It's just there. I don't think you can kill it. Yeah. So, a lot of what my ideas about writing had to come from kind of make my peace with all the processes, all the things that I didn't like about it. And, one of those truths that I had to make peace with is that you gain experience every single time, because otherwise it's just going to drive you crazy. You're going to keep doing it and it's going to keep driving you crazy. So you better make peace with it. And I made peace through understanding that I was always gaining experience, regardless of a finished product or not.
Gosh, okay, that's very insightful and very meta. So that moves me into my next thought. Let's imagine a teacher's listening to this right now, a teacher with a student a lot like you. What do you want them to understand?
That they're worth it. They're worth the time and effort it takes. Because from a teacher's perspective, it does take a lot of time and it does take a lot of effort, and it's not your first choice to teach a student with disabilities. It is hard, and I recognize that. It's a very difficult thing. But I want you to understand that it's worth it. That child will surprise you and will offer more to those around them, to society as a whole, if you put in that effort. If they really have that drive, they can go on and do amazing things. I'm not saying that I'm going to be that guy to go on and do amazing things. I'm not there. But, there's a lot of people with dyslexia. And are you really going to tell me that none of them will go on to do incredible things? And they don't have to go out and invent the latest and greatest whatever and change somebody's life. But to the people around them, they matter. They're worth it to those around them. If you just take a moment to understand, these, they matter in their community to those that love them. And it's not your first choice to take that extra time and extra resources that they need. It is hard. It is difficult. But they matter. They make a difference.
What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
I don't think I could have told him anything that would have changed it. Because, the person I am today was the effect of everyone else around me who was there every single day. That's what really changed me. It was you, and it was taking me down to the U of U reading clinic. It was giving me the intervention, the help that I needed. I don't think any one moment, I don't think a single moment of me going back and saying something and giving it a piece of advice would have changed that, because I would have to be there. It would have had to be from someone that was there every single day, in their corner every single day. That's what changes them. It's not just this one-off moment. You have to be there again and again and again and again. So I don't think I could say anything, and I don't think it would have changed the outcome.
Yeah.
It has to be continued. Yeah.
See, look at you. What do you wish people understood about dyslexia, or about being a creative person in a system that doesn't always make room for difference? What do you wish more people understood about that?
I feel like a lot of that just comes from it feels a little bit like a lack of empathy. Well, it is a lack of empathy, but it's not. I don't mean that to sound like mean. These people don't have the experience of what it's like to have dyslexia. That's totally okay. That's a perfectly reasonable thing not to have an experience for if you're non-dyslexic. I'm not faulting them for that. It's thinking that because someone can't write, or because someone can't read, that all of the other judgments that we make around that, it's like, well, they can't possibly be smart. They can't possibly, do these great things. I wish we'd stop tying intelligence to just reading and writing, because that feels like the pinnacle of intelligence is what you read, and it's what you write, and it's how you write, and it's how you read. And just those abilities alone, it feels like a definition issue with that. So allowing dyslexics to exist in a space and be creative in a space where it's not really tolerated or not appreciated, I should say, it comes from a definition of intelligence. And we have to decouple that from being able to read and write, because at a young age, you understood that my intelligence was not in how many words I read or what I was reading or what I was writing. But it was the stories I was able to tell in the medium that I was able to work in that was available to me. It's the medium doesn't necessarily make the artist. It's that art in whatever medium they choose, like you can have greatness there. Again, I don't want to pat my own back, but what I was saying wasn't great, or the stories I was telling was not greatness, but there was something there. There was a spark there. It was something, and you were able to recognize that. So in whatever medium that someone works in, recognize the talent, recognize the spark, whatever that is. I think that's a really important thing to walk away from. Don't write it off because of the medium. It's the thing that they're trying to do in the medium that should be analyzed through that lens.
Oh, that's so interesting, because that's pretty deep, actually. What you're saying is pretty deep. But you can take it on the surface of what you're saying, totally understood. But what you're really asking us to do, and what you're saying and pleading with, is saying, hey, look, view individuals, view people as more than just the situation that they're in. In essence, really, who are they at the heart? What is it they're offering?
Yeah. And if that's what if their offering is oral storytelling, then take it in context. It's for the context of oral storytelling. What is it doing, right? And then we can start to analyze, someone's intelligence from that. Not that you should, but that there's more than just the medium. The medium itself doesn't make the greatness. The greatness comes from more than that. And again, to add on to that just a little bit, if someone can't do something, and if it's really hard not to do that thing, like it's really hard to get through school and to never write. You have to write at some point. So if someone doesn't have the ability to write, they probably have a good reason to do that, right? If I go through school and someone can't speak, they probably have a good reason. My gut instinct isn't, oh, they just don't like speaking. They probably have a really good reason for not doing that. When it's not easy to get through class and to never write something. It's not easy to get through school and to have never read something. Those are not easy things to do. Those are really, really, really hard things to do, to get through that. It's a really rough experience. So if someone has those deficits, just assume on face value that they have a really, really good reason for those deficits, because it's not at all easy, right? Lazy is being able to write, but turning in a half-baked assignment every single, it's just kind of whatever, and not doing it at all, it's insane. Yeah. They have to have a really good reason for that. So don't immediately assume because someone can't read or can't write that it comes from that laziness. It's not easy to not read, to not write. It's not easy to be illiterate in a modern society. That is not at all an easy thing. It's not easy emotionally at all. So just, if there was anything that I'd want the audience to take away from that, specifically the non-dyslexic audience, is that it's not easy. When someone has such a great deficit like that, it is not an easy thing, and they have a good reason for it.
Okay, you just that alone, approaching, so it shifts your thinking around. Instead of looking at a situation like that and saying, oh, imagine this kid's making it hard for me yet again, or they're making it difficult. Instead, shift it to say how difficult it must be to be in that person's shoes, being the one who's unable to give you that written whatever, to read that whatever you've just asked them to read. It's not easy to be that person doing that right now.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Because it looks like it doesn't require much. Like, oh, you don't have to write the assignment. You're not going to, oh, that must be so easy for you because it's difficult for me to write. It's like, no, it's even harder not to write. It's even harder to go through every single parent-teacher conference meeting and have them talk about you like that. It's not at all easy. It's difficult in different ways, and it's in a lot of ways much, much harder than just, being able to write but not liking it. Yeah, but just that simple test, if I was this student and if I wasn't doing this, how hard would that be on me? How difficult? And more oftentimes than not, the answer is really, really difficult. It would be very, very hard on you as a student.
That's super insightful, just that right there. And not just about reading and writing, you've got me thinking about a lot of things where we make assumptions about people who don't seem to be doing the thing. And our immediate thought is, oh, they're just being difficult or whatever. But boy, that's a real shift in thought process, isn't it, for us?
Yeah.
To think it's not easy to be that person who isn't able to maybe physically lift that or do that thing too. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I always said you're the most insightful one. What did I say?
Thank you.
Yes.
I try.
You do try. You deliver too. That's the thing. You deliver every time. I have appreciated that you granted me this time because I've been after you for a while. And just the other day, I randomly asked, just on the off chance, and I just threw it out there. Gosh, would you be willing to have a conversation with me? It's Dyslexia Awareness Month. And when you said yes, what did I do? I jumped on it, didn't I?
Yeah, you jumped on it. Very excited. I got a fire in your eye.
I've jumped right on that. Well, this has been delightful, Bridget. Is there anything else you'd like to say you didn't get to touch on? Anything left unsaid? You said some great things, by the way.
When I was a kid, I never really, you guys would tell me that, maybe, one day at the end of this, you'll forget what it's like to have dyslexia. You won't even know what it's like. And I never believed that until, you live with this thing every single day, and it's a chip on your shoulder every single day, and it's a problem every single day. And it feels like when it's your every single day, it'll never leave. And that will be your life. And that's the best it's going to ever get. And you'll be at the same level forever. And so when you guys would tell me that, one day you'll forget about it, one day you won't know what it's like to have dyslexia or to, have it as bad as you do, it seemed like a lie, and I couldn't believe it. And you guys were right. Because eventually you live with that chip on your shoulder, and then it gets a little lighter and a little lighter and a little lighter until eventually you don't know it's even there. So eventually your biggest problems won't be dyslexia. You'll still have problems. They just won't be dyslexia. And as far as I'm concerned, those are good problems to have. And eventually if you work hard enough at it, you won't remember what it's like. That's a really hard thing to convince someone living it every single day, but it can happen. So just remember that it can happen. Eventually the biggest problem in your life won't be dyslexia if you keep working at it.
Wow. And you are a testament to early and heavy intervention.
Yeah.
A real testament to that. So I put that plug out there too, as we're trying to push legislation to get in earlier and push harder. What a story that is. Wow, that's powerful. Oof, I've always said that being Bridger's mother has forced me to rethink everything I thought I knew about learning and about teaching. And even after all these years, I'm still learning from this boy who once said, I'm going to tell you something you don't know that is mostly true. You're right. Because what you've taught me is something most people don't know. Not really. That brilliance doesn't always look like we expect it to. And that difference isn't deficient. And that the kids we call struggling readers may in fact be telling stories we just don't know how to hear yet. So if today's episode resonated with you as a parent, an educator, or someone who learns a little differently, I hope you'll share it. Start a conversation. Ask a question. Tell a story. Because someone out there is waiting to feel seen. Thanks for listening, and thanks for talking to me, Bridger.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.